Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly Charrington, and I would like to welcome each of you on behalf of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, otherwise known as NIDS, for tuning into today's HUSI seminar. NIDS is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides deterrence education by hosting live and virtual events, podcasts, publications on global security, as well as workshops and courses through our NIDS Academy, all in the interest of advancing peace and promoting stability through a strong national security and nuclear deterrent. You can see more of what we have to offer and get involved at thinkdeterrence.com. Please help us grow our membership and our audiences by following us on LinkedIn, X, Rumble, YouTube, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Next Friday's HUSI seminar will feature next steps in Homeland Security, missile defense with Honorable David J. Trachtenberg, and we hope you and your teams will all join us. During our presentation today, we encourage you to write questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the very top of your screen. You can do that at any time. When we begin the Q&A portion of this presentation, one of us will read the question that you've submitted. However, if you don't get your question answered today, we'll be sure to send it to our guests afterwards, and they have an option to separately message you. Or you can email us afterwards at nids@thinkdeterrence.com and we'll pass it along. I want to introduce our host for today's seminar, Mr. Peter HUSI, President and Senior Director of the Strategic Deterrence Studies at Geostrategic Analysis and Senior Fellow here at NIDS. Peter?
Thank you very much, Kimberly, and I want to welcome our two wonderful guests, Franklin Miller and Madelyn Creedon, who are our two speakers today, and they are going to review the Strategic Posture Commission report in two ways. One is looking at policy, and the other looking at the program elements that are part of what'll make the policy work. I also just wanted to say hello to our friends, General Stoss and General Kowalski, both of whom are retired Air Force, but were very, very instrumental in getting us to where we are today. Also want to say hello to Tom Triano and Rob Sufer and our friend from the Danish Embassy, Niles Olsen, and then our Vice President, Adam Lothar, is also joined us today, and I want to thank them all for doing that. Frank Miller, as many of you know, was a longtime official in the Department of Defense, and then in the White House on strategic issues, and then works as a principal in the Scowcroft Group. Madelyn Creedon I first met her when she was a senior staffer on the Senate Armed Services Committee. She then was deputy administrator for the NNSA, and then she was in the Department of Defense as well. Both of these two people have been deeply involved in strategic nuclear modernization and deterrence for probably over 4 decades. And they're going to share with us their expertise and knowledge about where we are. We're going to start with our guest, Madelyn Creedon. So Madelyn, thank you again. I know you're a busy person, and it's always an honor to have you come over and chat with us. So over to you, Madelyn.
Well, thanks, Peter. And I appreciate the invitation. And I always appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion with Frank. Frank and I have spoken together on a number of panels, and of course, we were both on the Strategic Posture Commission together. So just to start, we have I want to give a little background. So we all know that for more than 3 decades after the end of the Cold War, the United States and its allies really faced no serious nuclear threats. Russia and the US weren't enemies, but they weren't friends either. And so we were living in that world for quite some time of frenemies. But time changes everything. And today we don't have time, nor is it really topical. So we won't dissect the last 30 years and how we actually got here, but we're here. And so now we have to face the reality. And facing that reality means that the US and its allies can no longer ignore the nuclear threats from Russia and China. So that was one of 80 plus findings and recommendations for the Strategic Posture Commission. I should note that some of the other recommendations included recommendations to Congress that included no continuing resolutions, passing appropriations bills on time, and avoiding government shutdowns. So we're not making much progress on those first two, and we'll just have to wait another few days to see what happens on that third one. But we have others that are probably more apropos to our discussion today. Although, all joking aside, the late appropriations bills, the CRs, and even a government shutdown, should that happen, it had pretty significant impacts on all of these modernization programs as they tend to delay them and increase the costs. But back to the recommendations that we're actually here to discuss today. So the rapid growth of China's nuclear forces and Russia's non-strategic forces, as well as their modernized strategic forces, all pose far-reaching challenges to U.S. national security. The United States no longer has the luxury of ignoring nuclear dangers and the legacy of the Cold War, which was to be able to concentrate on deterring a single adversary. So to address this new reality and consistent with the Strategic Posture Commission recommendations, the Biden administration at the very end of its term modified U.S. nuclear targeting guidance in order to be able to deter China, Russia, and the DPRK simultaneously in all circumstances, including peacetime and war. So while it took the Biden administration some time to actually come to this conclusion, and it's somewhat different from the 22 nuclear posture review, they did reach this conclusion, and they in fact embraced this particular recommendation of the Strategic Posture Commission, and arguably one of the most important. And the new guidance recognized that deterrence is made more challenging by the evidence of growing collaboration and collusion between Russia, the PRC, DPRK, and Iran. Further, the guidance noted the possibility of coordinated or opportunistic aggression by a combination of adversaries in a conflict, which would require U.S. strategists to think carefully about complex escalation dynamics and deterring multiple adversaries simultaneously, including in extended crisis or conflicts. So the change in the employment guidance in doctrine and the embracing of these new challenges really was a significant step. And while it seems sort of obvious and in this sort of seemingly obvious direction, it really was a big change in U.S. policy, and it took several years to fully embrace. But deterring two nuclear peers for the first time will be a huge undertaking and require study and analysis. Implementing the policy is the analytic homework for the new administration, not reanalyzing the problem, which is very clear, and not reanalyzing the policy, which is also in pretty good shape, basically. It's the implementation that truly is the challenge. And I know many talk about this new challenge, but what it actually means to the U.S. And our allies for force structure changes and execution is not, I would argue, not only is it not fully understood, I would argue it's not even a little bit understood. And hence the challenge to the new administration to begin to really understand what are the impacts of this new security environment. So efforts to modernize the aging U.S. nuclear deterrent were hampered by a late start, inadequate industrial base capacity, materials and labor shortage, and funding gaps. So on the National Nuclear Security Administration side, they have made good progress. The first pit, the first diamond stamp pit, in other words, war reserve pit, was produced in October. And last year, Pantex, the assembly and disassembly facility in the panhandle of Texas, produced more nuclear weapons than any year since the end of the Cold War. So that really is an achievement and a symbol that there is progress being made on the warhead front. But what needs to be done really is clear. The next administration should dispense with undertaking an extensive review of either the nuclear deterrence policy or the modernization plans. There's a huge need to just get on with the work of modernization and fix the problems. While there may be some opportunities on the margins for near-term programmatic change, the primary programmatic challenge is modernizing the NNSA nuclear complex. So there are options in the future, when and if the country needs them, to implement the tenets of nuclear policy. So I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page. And to be clear, the 6 tenets of nuclear policy remain sound. And these are assured second strike, maintaining the ability to conduct a flexible response, having the ability to tailor the deterrence, assuring extended deterrence, and assuring our allies, having our policy be clear that we have calculated ambiguity, and also to make sure that we hedge against risk. So NNSA will need new science and computational capabilities, as well as modern design and manufacturing capabilities to keep the current warhead modernization programs on track. But more importantly, these capabilities will be needed as NNSA transitions from life extensions to new warheads. It generally isn't possible to do a second life extension, so new, more manufacturable designs will be needed to replace the current warheads in less time and at less cost, and to be able to provide that ability to both have a flexible response and to tailor the deterrence. The challenges will be to design and develop new capabilities to meet the policy implementation challenges in the coming decades. And this has to be done faster and cheaper. And, I know we always talk about this, but in this case, if we truly are serious about implementing the challenge of the new geopolitical environment, we really do have to adapt and adopt both our design methodologies and our manufacturing methodologies, so we can produce more varieties of different warheads and do them for less money. But as the Commission found, the current modernization program is necessary but not sufficient. So on the warhead side of the systems, the current modernization programs are the path to the new warheads, and we need to get away from the life extensions. Further extending the life of current warheads will be more difficult, more expensive, will generate more technical challenge in the future, and keeping the older systems going will actually take away money and design talent needed for these new systems, further delaying the new and perpetuating the need to keep the old, an expensive and unproductive cycle. But moving to the new should not be confused with increased stockpile numbers, but replacements that are more flexible, easier to maintain, and tailored to meet future deterrence requirements. So today, there's almost no margin to change the program of record on the warhead side, except for some modifications within the existing production lines. And for that, I would cite the B6113 as an example, which is a modification of the warhead currently being deployed in Europe, the 6112. And this 6113 is a higher yield variant of the 6112. And it will be available for one of the longstanding challenges that we have, and that's trying to get after hardened targets. Thus, the emphasis from the warhead perspective really should be moving to designs that use readily available materials, are simpler, and that are not bound by past requirements. The new designs will be well understood, or they should be. They'll be based on testing history, but with enhanced knowledge gained from the Stockpiled Stewardship Program. The new designs will actually reduce any need to resume explosive nuclear testing. Also important, to limit escalation or deter ab initio, limit strategic or other nuclear attacks. The new administration will also have to look at what other options might be available. And I know Frank's going to talk about this as well, but the SLIC amendment may actually check part of that box, but it's not the only one. So looking at how these new policies are implemented, to manage escalation, particularly in a limited nuclear attack, will also be a big homework and analytic assignment for this new administration. DoD also needs more conventional capabilities: bombers, tankers, hypersonics, regional missile defense, but I think Frank's going to discuss those as well. But a significant new policy challenge that's also looming in our future will be what to do when New START expires. The most optimistic outcome would be an agreement between the US and Russia to voluntarily agree to maintain the central limits of the New START treaty. Possibly with some inspection and verification, but at least with some mechanism for mutual declarations. And I would posit that maybe that's an element of whatever new agreement comes about if it is successful in ending the war in Ukraine. Maybe this might be something that gets added to that agreement, which would also provide some assurance, not only to Europe and Ukraine, but to the US, that Russia will not break out, in essence, or exceed what are now the central limits of the New START treaty, at least on their strategic systems. Underpinning all of the policy changes, of course, will be the need for significantly improved coordination with allies, including planning and developing new capabilities together that can be utilized together. And the new employment guidance emphasized this by saying that one of the key priorities would be to enable deeper consultation, coordination, and combined planning with NATO and Indo-Pacific allies and partners in order to strengthen US extended deterrence commitments. At bottom, the US isn't prepared for this new challenge, and so the task of the new administration is basically to get on with it. Focus on keeping the deterrent safe, secure, and reliable, and maintain the workforce to do the work. And I would note in closing that not only do we have an aging stockpile that's being kept going with life extension programs, we also have an aging workforce. And unfortunately, there are no life extension programs for our aging workforce. So it's been a goal of the NNSA for the last 10 years to be able to correct for what is a bathtub distribution, with more older folks and not so many new folks, but to grow the new folks because we don't have a middle. So growing that new workforce of the future, being able to utilize their new skills, their new capabilities in designing new warheads and coming up with modern manufacturing capabilities is absolutely essential to our deterrent in the future. With that, I will close and turn it over to Frank.
Frank, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. It's great to be back with you and Madelyn and Kimberly. To forestall any questions from my three followers, I am not having a facelift. I haven't been in a bar fight. I did slip and fall, but so we don't need to go over that. Since it is now baseball season, what I thought I would do is follow up Madelyn's description of overarching policies and just do kind of a scorecard on where we are on the Commission's recommendations. The first was to address the larger number of targets because the Chinese nuclear threat is no longer a lesser included case. That's to be determined. We'll have to see in the next really 2 years or so whether the administration is going to do that. Actually, the first year or so, and this is the only place I will ever be on record as breaking with Madelyn, I don't think New START serves our interests after next year, because I think we're going to need to expand the strategic force incrementally, not massively, incrementally, to continue to cover both the Russian and Chinese target base and have some for North Korea. Address the possibility that China will field large-scale counterforce capable missile forces. The Biden administration was clearly on a path to continuing down that road. And I guess I should say at this point that everything I say, with a few exceptions, is to be determined as we await decisions from the Trump administration on the report's recommendations. Recommendation: assure the United States continues to avoid reliance on executing ICBM launch under attack, to rely on it, and I think that certainly will continue. Recommendation, prepare to upload some or all of the nation's hedge warheads. I think that is on track. You saw a recent Minuteman test that carried multiple RVs. That's all to the good. I don't think there has been any work done seriously on the plan to deploy Sentinel in a MIRV mode. Right now, we need to get the Sentinel program back on track in its initial problems. We all know about the Nunn-McCurdy breach. So I think the key element of Sentinel is get back on track for the original and then look at potential increases. Recommendation to increase the planned number of deployed long-range standoff weapons for the bomber force. No action, I think, by either Biden or nothing implied by Trump on that. Increase the planned number of B-21s as a recommendation. That's gone back and forth. The number 100 is clearly inadequate for both nuclear and conventional missions. The Air Force Chief of Staff, about October or so, said there were going to be 100 of them. Then there was some backtracking. The Trump administration will need to decide how many bombers it's going to procure in the out years. Recommendation, develop plans and procedures to reconvert SLBM launchers on the Trident boats that were neutered for New Start purposes. I think that planning is underway with Navy. And again, assuming that the New Start Treaty is not retained as central limits after January of next year, that will go forward. Ensure that those B-52s that were rendered incapable of running a nuclear mission, thanks to New Start, to be able to reconvert them to a nuclear role. That planning is underway. The Air Force has incorporated that in a number of other fixes and modifications to be made to the B-52s on the way to creating B-52Js. So that will not be a rapid change. Provide sufficient funding to ensure existing deployed systems such as NC-3 and the Ohio-class boats can operate past their currently planned retirement dates. That, I believe, is on track. Urgently modify the U.S. theater nuclear force posture. That was a recommendation. A recommendation addressed the need for U.S. theater nuclear forces deployed or based in the Asia-Pacific theater. And this has been an interesting area where the first Trump administration inaugurated a SLCM-N program. The Biden administration killed it. The Congress has now declared that it is an essential part of our deterrent and caused the Navy to create a program office. The Secretary of the Navy designate, Mr. Phelan, said yesterday in testimony that he believes SLCM-N was important to the nation's deterrent capability. So I believe that that's something on the scorecard that we can put a check against. And indeed, Mr. Phelan said that the Columbia was among the Navy's highest priorities. And so I think we can put a check mark against that. To develop and deploy theater nuclear delivery systems that have all of a number of attributes, which was survivability, forward deployment, range of yields, etc. The commission did not, I repeat, endorse SLCM-N by name. But if you look at SLCM-N and you look at the capabilities that the commission was hoping would be put into the force, then I think that is moving forward. The commission recommended prioritizing and accelerating long-range conventional strike. The good news there is that testing on the long-range hypersonic system being jointly developed by Army and Navy has been successful. The press reports that Army is preparing to deploy its version, the Dark Eagle version, later this calendar year. I think the Navy version requires some real watching because in classic big Navy fashion, there are people at the top of the uniform Navy who don't want to do that. Actually, I should change that. in the Navy Secretariat, which Mr. Trump has inherited, don't want to go with long range strike, don't want to have Zumwalt class destroyers, want to sink enemy ships. That's not the mission at this point. You can't operate in the South China Sea if you don't suppress enemy A2AD. So Navy long range strike is also absolutely essential. Congress is going to have to watch that very, very carefully, as will the White House and the Secretary of Defense. Prioritizing air refueling was one of our recommendations. Nothing's happened on that. Former Air Force Secretary Kendall finally admitted that his 4-year quest to kick the can down the road in favor of some sort of a new future stealth tanker that doesn't exist had been a failure. So we are where we are. We have an inadequate number of KC-46s to have, and we have an inadequate fleet to support military operations against China and Russia. The new administration has that as a do-out. Commission recommended preserving essential portions of the electromagnetic spectrum. If you follow the Hill, that is now a fight on the Hill among a variety of GOP senators. Madelyn's talked about our recommendation on the urgent expansion of the NNSA production base. Another recommendation of ours was to increase shipbuilding capacity. That's kind of a duh. Yeah, that's got to be done, but no one has really figured out a way to do it. Again, Navy Secretary Designate Phelan said in his remarks to the SASC during his confirmation hearing this week that this is a major problem he has to address. Amen and amen. And I think the last thing, which is important, and this is another one where the commission's recommendation is in fact now designated to go forward, is the commission recommended developing an integrated air and missile defense for the United States to protect key parts of our infrastructure in order to raise the bar to Russian and Chinese aggression or leverage. And with the announcement by Mr. Trump of going to a Golden Dome or an Iron Dome or whatever you want to call it, I think that is a step towards creating the kind of capability the commission envisioned. As always, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We're going to have to see what comes back from MDA after it the 60-day deadline for developing an architecture for that continues. I certainly hope it contains significant elements of space-based sensor capability and space-based interceptor capability, but that's Miller talking, not the commission. But the notion of moving forward to an IAMD for the United States, and tellingly in the Trump executive order for the allies, is a step forward in this regard. So, Kimberly, why don't I wrap up there, and let's go to questions, which will always be interesting.
Great. Thank you so much for your insights. And Peter is going to lead us off with questions.
I want to ask both of you these questions and take them as you wish. The first issue is, and Rose Gottmiller raised this at her seminar speech last year, where she spoke, and it was slick 'em, and even if, let's say it's a great idea, which I believe it is, the timeline to get it deployed is, I'm wondering, some people say, well, why not use old conventional Tomahawks and modify them as opposed to building a new missile? So that's question number one, which I'd like Frank and Madelyn to address.
So I'll jump in, and then Madelyn can agree or disagree. The question of Slick-O-Man is tendentious, and it's because there is no Slick-O-Man, right? The system doesn't exist. There are those, and I was at a meeting, unclassified meeting in December, where one of the laboratory directors said we could have a Slick-O-Man fielded by 2028. that obviously made a number of assumptions about warhead and carrier vehicle. There's no reason to believe, if Slick-O-Man is a priority, that you can't have sort of a do it quick and dirty now, and then have another version to be deployed in the mid to late 2030s. There are a number of issues: nuclear safety, nuclear command and control that has to be worked into the attack boats. But it's very much in the hands of Navy to make sure that something comes out. It's very much in the hands of the Congress to make sure that and this time I will say, the Navy uniforms who don't understand and appreciate the value of Slick-O-Man to the national defense don't get in the way as they have in the past. And the third thing is, what with the cutting of, provisional employees and all, as Navy stood up a TLAMN office, as SSP stood up the TLAMN office, you don't want to lose those people because they're provisional employees and therefore they have to get fired as part of financial savings. But Madelyn may have a different view.
No, actually, I agree with Frank. The bulk of this work really is on the back of the Navy. So it falls to the Navy to rapidly, urgently respond if they're going to do it. I think NNSA has concepts for the warhead well in hand. So I don't think that's certainly that's not the long pole in this tent. But as Frank said, there is reticence, I think, on the part of the Navy to move in an urgent fashion. And, at some level, given the controversy that's sort of always swirled around the Slick-O-Man, it is one of the reasons why the commission didn't endorse this or any other specific material solution to the problem. Instead, we identified a large number of capabilities that would be needed, particularly in the Asia Pacific theater. So, my concern is that if we don't move out, or if for whatever reason we can't move out promptly on the Slick-O-Man, that we simultaneously look at other options that maybe could be implemented sooner, or that might be more attractive to the Navy. I have no idea what this is, but I don't see an alternative to some sort of a Navy ship-based system at the moment, just for, any number of reasons, not the least of which is, you'd have to put it, if you put it on land, you'd have to put it primarily on land that belonged to an ally,
Right.
just because U.S. land, take Guam for instance, is sort of far away, from where you're going to need it. So, yeah, it's a huge challenge, and the Navy is going to have to embrace it, or we're going to have to figure out something else. But I do think there is an urgency here to address this problem.
Madelyn, let me follow up with you and Frank on that. Is what Rose had suggested was a air-based or bomber-based short-range cruise missile. Again, the problem is where you're going to base it, because if Guam is quite a ways away from some of the areas you'd want to hold at risk in the Asian Pacific. So briefly, could you come back on that as a possible near-term alternative to Slick-O-Man?
Well, the Air Force actually is making really, really good progress, as is the NNSA on the LRSO. That's sort of, I think, what she might be talking about. That,
Right.
That is a bomber based, and that one's moving along pretty well. So far it's, the warhead's on track, and the missile's on track, and, it's not, it isn't going to, we're not going to see it in 2 years, but we are going to see it, and
Okay.
that one's in pretty good shape. I think the question maybe is there a way to accelerate that at some level? And again, I think if you're going to accelerate it, the issue may actually be on the NNSA production side. But that the LRSO is, I think, what Rose was talking about. So that's already ongoing and has been for quite a while.
Okay.
So I would make a couple of comments, but I endorse that absolutely what Madelyn said about Slick-O-Man. The fact that Secretary Designate Phelan supports the system, as opposed to former Secretary Del Toro, who fought the system and tried to kill it, I think is very important. On the air side, LRSO is a good system, but that's something that can only be carried by U.S. strategic bombers. I would like to see a development effort to create a standoff weapon that can be carried in the F-35, and therefore that could be deployed with U.S. allies in Europe, as well as with the U.S. Air Force in Europe, and obviously it could be put with U.S. units in the Pacific as well. There's no one answer to the deterrence problem, and where the commission came down was to talk about the need to provide the president with flexibility. And having two systems, sort of an air-delivered system and a sea-based system, is much more preferable than simply having one or the other. And so that's why I think in this case, a mix of systems is exactly what we need. We don't need the size of the arsenals of non-strategic weapons that the Russians have or the Chinese have. But to work our own strategy, we do need to have flexible capabilities which are regionally oriented.
Good, thank you very much. We have a question from a colleague of ours from Australia. He says, with the actions America takes to display our nuclear deterrent capability, which are most stabilizing? One or two? One is frequent, consistent display of our traditional triad platforms, or a more ambiguous display of our flexibility with new postures and new strategies.
I would almost say you need both. I don't think
I
it's
would
a one
agree,
or the
yes.
other. I mean,
Yeah.
you need both.
It's not an either or.
Uh-uh.
No.
Good, okay.
No.
No, I just, that's it.
Yeah.
My next question is, it's something I'm very much doing some work on right now, and that is, I'd like Madelyn to start, and then Frank, where are we with respect to the production of tritium? Is it an issue? What are the issues? And do you recommend any particular way we should go forward?
Tritium actually now is the one bright light in NNSA. Obviously, bright lights are relative, but at the moment, tritium is actually in pretty good shape. The TVA reactors have gotten licenses to increase the production. The production of the TP bars, the actual bars that go into the reactors that then come out, and then NNSA down at Savannah River extracts the tritium. Those are going well. They've increased the number of TP bars in the reactors. One of the facilities at Savannah River is they either are getting ready to, or they've already started. I'm actually not sure on the timing of it, but they're about ready to move into what's going to be about a year-long outage to do some updates. And then there's one older facility that's going to have to be replaced. And NNSA is looking at how to fit that into their overall enterprise blueprint, which lays out all of the infrastructure build needs that they need for the future. But right now, tritium's actually in pretty good shape.
Okay. Frank, any additional comment?
Madelyn's the expert. You know, the thing is, I mean, I was involved in the whole decision back in, I think it was the early 90s, to get Watts Bar to produce tritium in the first place. This is something we just can't neglect. I mean, you know, early 90s that's like 30 years ago, you know, and so we need to continue to modernize, retain, modernize, build new capabilities as the old ones age out. And so that's the only thing that I would add.
My next question, Madelyn, is particularly the conversations we had when you were on the Senate Armed Services Committee, is what do you think has changed with respect to how Congress views missile and air defenses against not rogue states, but to the extent that China and Russia are rogue states, I would include them. But dealing with missile defense and air defense against Russia and China was always a very contentious issue, but we seem to have now moved. What caused us to move, and what are there still barriers on the hill that going to still make it difficult perhaps to move forward?
Well, of course, there are always barriers that are going to make anything difficult to move forward because it costs money, right? And you
Yes.
know, there are always different camps about spending money or cutting taxes or whatever. I mean, those debates are always going to be there. But I think one of the changes, and it's actually reflected in the commission's report, is the is what has changed, right? And so for the longest period of time, there really was no expectation that either Russia or China would actually conduct an attack on the U.S., right? I mean, it just was not really conceivable. And now I think, although we're not really, I mean, I don't think we're still we're looking at, or there's still a threat of some large out of the blue attack by either of them. Don't think that's realistic at all. Um, but given the increased tensions in both theaters, given the possibility of collusion or coordination or even opportunistic aggression on one or the other, and this idea of trying to keep the U.S. out of whatever these regional contests are, keep the U.S. out, prevent the U.S. from coming to the aid of its allies. You know, one of the things we talked about in the commission report, and I think is an increasing threat, and it could be nuclear, but it may not be, is this notion that either or will attack the U.S. in a way to deter the U.S. from coming to the aid. You know, so and this is on our key critical infrastructures. And you know, Frank mentioned it. This is the big change. I think we need to be serious about what are those key critical infrastructure elements that need some localized defensive capabilities. You know, it's our sub bases. You know, but I think what has to be done is this list has to be developed of this key infrastructure, and then really look at what are those things that could be deployed. You know, is it a point defense? Is it a THAAD? Is it a Patriot? Whatever, you know, so that we can protect these key critical infrastructures. And ironically, you know, you get this question, well, what if it's a great big attack? And, you know, the great big attack isn't really the problem, because I think there is a fine line between sort of a low-level coercive attack that would deter the U.S. from coming in, and a much larger attack, which actually would sort of enrage the U.S. and the U.S. would see the need to come in. So there's a fine line between a small attack that would deter the U.S. and a larger attack which would enrage the U.S. But it's making sure we're not deterred from coming into the fight.
I'd make 2 points, Peter. First, and both goes to what Madelyn said about changing circumstances. The first is, you know, while we hear all the talk from Lavrov and Peskov and the usual crowd about why missile defense is bad, it's very clear that the Russians and the Chinese following them are working on very sophisticated integrated air and missile defenses using S-400s and S-500s and other systems. So they are building sort of mini BMD centers in specific areas, which could have an ABM capability at some point. So the fact that, you know, you can't say missile defense has been bad, is bad now, and will always be bad. That's just, you know, that doesn't work. It doesn't undercut strategic stability because the other guys out there doing it. The second thing, and I think what we have seen, what we have witnessed, the horror in Ukraine, is that the Russians are using conventionally armed ballistic missiles to wreak havoc as elements of blackmail and coercion. And so one of the things that we talked about on the commission was exactly that, to prevent Russia or China or North Korea from having the capability to use conventionally armed ballistic missiles as elements of leverage in a conventional war by hitting targets in the homeland. And the ability to block those kinds of limited coercive attacks adds to deterrence.
Yeah, General Kowalski has a question for us. It says, I'll just quote it. Is it time to explore an air-to-ground missile for the theater nuclear mission to replace the B-61?
So that's what I was saying. I mean, I'll jump in because I'm the guy that I think was aimed at. I don't know. I didn't use the word replace, but I think to augment. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about, is some sort of a standoff weapon for the F-35s that could be used by US and NATO F-35s as part of the nuclear deterrent mission. Does that mean you get rid of all the gravity bombs? I mean, I'm not going to go there, but a standoff capability with a nuclear tip would be a very useful addition to our theater capabilities on a regional basis.
So given that we just completed the life extension on the 6112, and it's right this moment, it's the newest system in the
Right.
arsenal, I would not get rid of it. And also because it is for the near term, the nuclear system that is going to be on the F-35s in Europe, and so it still remains important for Europe. And with the combination of its new capabilities, its improved accuracy, and with the F-35 as it gets fielded, it's certainly much better than the old variants, with the F-15s and the F-16s. I mean, it's significantly improved. But that's not to say it should be the only one. So I mean, if there is, as I say, if there is a capability to do an LRSO-like thing, obviously the LRSO is too big for the F-35, but if there is an option for something on the F-35 that's a standoff cruise missile capability, that fits the recommendations of the commission, where we identified capabilities. I think at some point it's just making sure that when this analysis is done as to what the capabilities are needed, that we have a clear understanding of the integrated picture and the integrated needs. I do worry a little bit that we sort of chase one-offs without fully understanding what the bigger picture looks like and what the integrated needs are and the targets are. That's what I would argue is that let's put together this big picture and then figure out what the material solutions are rather than chasing individual material solutions.
You both know that I live and breathe ICBMs and have for, 45 years. I'd like you to both address where you come out on Sentinel, and in particular addressing Frank's question of getting completely away from launch under attack so that we have, confirmed detonation of an attack before we do anything. But then also what you're, Frank, you may have to correct me on this, but where are we with respect to Sentinel? I'd like you both to emphasize those things you're not only concerned with, but also the need for it, the benefits and so forth. And Frank, to address your question of that you talked about the commission recommendation.
Well, let me clarify. Beginning in 1979 and carried forward to the present day, and I don't think it will change, it's been explicit U.S. policy that we will not rely, underscore 3 times, we will not rely on the capability to launch under attack to preserve the strength of our deterrent. That means that we have the capability to launch under attack.
Agreed.
Any potential enemy has to take that into account.
Right.
But that we have other plans and other systems in the worst case, which is to say that we get caught in a preemptive attack so that we're able to go back and still present the enemy with a complete loss of his valued assets. That's what I meant. I mean, I think that the Sentinel program is quite valuable. I would like to see that unstuck, to use a word that's okay for family conversations. And the missile, the infrastructure, the silos, and the command and control all need to be taken up some degree of seriousness. And You know, I mean, the Air Force and the Navy go about long-range ballistic missiles differently. In the Navy, it's all under SSP. You know,
That's right.
Admiral Wolf's got the whole thing. The Air Force piece parcels it out, and then it sort of hopefully comes together at some point. I'd love to see the Air Force put a 3-star in charge of the whole ICBM effort. That's me talking, okay? But I think to answer your question, I think that the Sentinel program is very, very important to our overall deterrent capability. I turn to Madeline.
Yeah, I mean, just one point is, I know General Bussier, I guess it was maybe last summer, did succeed in getting some improvements in terms of the level of the oversight on the ICBM program, and also some integration of the parts and pieces of the ICBM program. But you know, on the longer term, I think the Air Force really has to rethink this program. I mean, it's absolutely essential that we have an ICBM program. But if as all of the press reports indicate, the missiles are on a pretty good course, you know, in terms of their development, it's the silos that are the problem. You know, and yet at the outset of all this, the missile was supposed to fit in the, the missile was supposed to fit in the silo, and we were supposed to reuse the silo. You know, now it's my understanding that that's not the case, right? That we have to either enlarge the silos, or you need new silos because the missile has grown in size. So, you know, I mean, I think the Air Force has to get really serious about how they think about the basing, if you will, of these systems. You know, is there some cheaper way to do silos? I mean, I don't know. And you know, it's just sort of what you read in the press, that there's a disconnect between the missile and the silo. But it absolutely is essential. I mean, we need this capability to deter. And it is one of the things I think that deters that attack out of the blue. And it is one of the capabilities that makes that large strike out of the blue much less of a reality. You know, if you took it away, if you took the Sentinel away, if you took the ICBMs away, now suddenly other targets look much more appealing. So there's a huge need for this leg of the triad. I just think there's some serious work that needs to be done in terms of rethinking the silo aspect of this.
I'm going to turn it over to our president, Jim Petrosky, but I want to ask one more question, and that is, a senior member of the Air Force with whom I work weekly has emphasized something repeatedly, and I don't know the answer to it. And he says, even within our service and the other services, there is not the urgency to understand how serious we are behind, because he said, I can't recapture time that I lost. When I had, as General Herensack said, you know, if you've been on a holiday for 20 years in the nuclear business, you can't go find that 20 years somewhere else and say, everybody, the bad guys, wait a minute, let us catch up, we'll see you. So as someone who's in the business of what we called public diplomacy when I started this, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong in terms of getting not only Congress, but the country, the Deb Fishers, the Mike Rogers, they see this, but I don't know if the country does. I don't know if the media does. I don't know if in general. So it's a tough question, I think, because I'm not sure what the answer is, but you two are been two architects of getting this done right. And what's your insight on that?
Well, Frank, I don't know. Do you want to start? Let me. Maybe we'll just go back and forth here for a little bit. One is obviously everything got to a late start. You know, this was one of the things at the end of the Cold War. We weren't going to need them. Things kept getting pushed forward. Well, we'll just extend them. We'll just extend them. We'll just extend them. And you know, now we're to the point where we're about ready to fall off the cliff, and because all the new systems are so late, the period of transition is even higher risk. And the longer that things are, the higher the risk that the old stuff will continue to live. So at one level, whereas I used to be a lot more worried about the warheads, because NNSA, I think, recently has grasped the urgency, although nothing is urgent in this enterprise. I mean, nothing is fast in this enterprise, even if it's urgent. They are, they are moving out. I mean, as I mentioned, they produced more warheads at Pantex than any other year since the Cold War. There's one pit. Okay, there's one pit. Took us forever to get one pit. But the plan now is to get all the equipment in PF4 to make more pits. So hopefully that happens. Hopefully NNSA can get Savannah River back on track. The new uranium production facility, sadly late, but sort of coming around. Where I see the lack of urgency at this point is two places. One in the services, and the other place is on the Hill. One of the recommendations of the commission was that U.S. leadership, and by that we meant the president, elected leaders in the Senate, in the House, it's up to them to not only understand where we are and this change, but to communicate that to the public, and get that we cannot ignore this problem anymore. It's still a very small percent of the defense budget, but we have to fund it.
I absolutely agree. Let me say a couple of things. First, I mean, to the topic of this discussion, and thank you for having it. And without breaking my arm, patting me and Madelyn on the back, I think the Posture Commission has made a significant contribution to the national debate on this. I mean, it did change, I think, the course of our thinking from sort of a focus on Russia to a focus on two peers, and what we needed to do about that. And it talked about missile defense, and it talked about advanced conventional weapons. And I think it provides a very good blueprint for what needs to be done. Keith Payne, I think it was, said that he went through the report, and we used the word, Madelyn, urgent about 40 or 50 times. And to Madelyn's point, no one's really picked up on the urgent. We've got to see these tasks through to completion. Madelyn and I wrote a piece in Foreign Affairs a couple of months ago where we said, look, this is too important for the services. The Secretary of Defense needs to take charge in a manner that Secretary Weinberger took charge in the Reagan administration, and stay on top of these programs until he is convinced that, in fact, they're on track and everything is being done to get them to produce ships, planes, and missiles as rapidly as is safely possible. And that's what I think needs to be done. We're getting the endorsements from the administration, in the sense that when Secretary Hegseth listed his, he programs eligible for 8% cuts, there were 17 exemptions. The Strategic Modernization Program was one of those exemptions. Yep. The Virginia-class submarine was one of those exemptions. So, you got to follow up. You can't let the system do what the system does, which is business as usual, because as Madelyn just finished saying, it's not a business as usual time. I mean, just one example, there's a story this week that the Naval Shipyard in Kittery, Maine, the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, the historic Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, had to stop hiring for shipyard workers because of what's going on in Washington with respect to freezing government employment. Well, you're not going to get more submarines refurbished and out at sea if you stop hiring shipyard workers. It ain't going to work. So you need the secretary to take charge and to make certain that we're doing what is necessary. I mean, that's the usual Frank Miller tub thumping speech, but I mean, I believe it in my soul.
No,
Peter,
go
I
ahead,
just want to add, similarly, the people are so important. And, I know at the moment, this is pretty controversial to actually admit that people are important. But, one of the challenges is that NNSA, as the successor to the Atomic Energy Commission, happens to live in the Department of Energy. And even though it's defense funded, it's It was set up under Title 50, which is a national security title, and it's overseen by the Armed Services Committee. And the national security workforce is in theory supposed to be protected. That's a hard thing to understand, right? It's a hard thing for outside people to understand why DOE has national security people. But the administration, the secretary, everybody has to understand, yes, NNSA is part of DOE, but it is a national security function, and it needs to
Exactly.
be recognized and protected. And
Agreed.
every single administration has to learn this over and over again. But these are people who they're important, and they're hard to get, and they're hard to keep. And we
And
need
one other point, Peter, just tiny thing.
Go ahead.
Something Madelyn said in her opening remarks. If we're going to have 3 CRs to take us to the end of September, oh my gosh, talk about self-inflicted wounds.
No, exactly. That's someone who worked on the Hill as Madelyn did. It's you want to tear your hair out. There is one more question that I really would like to ask, because it's going to be part of my symposium in Louisiana. And that is, one of our colleagues says, why is there not a more dedicated effort to get new college graduates into the nuclear workforce? My daughter is seeking a nuclear internship and has experience as a national lab and defense prime contractor. She has a clearance, but has had limited success finding an internship this year. I've proposed that every industry ought to just put a pot of money out there and have internships in the nuclear business. But I do want you guys to address that, because that's part of the bathtub issue of, we got old graybeards, but we got to bring people in.
I agree, and I'm astounded and horrified, to use a word I don't use much, at the fact that the administration apparently has decided at the DOGE level to kill the Presidential Management Fellows Program. I mean, if you were looking at one program in the course of my, decades of government service that brought bright young people into the government and fast-tracked them, it was the PMI-PMF program. To kill that goes exactly against what you're saying. It cuts off one of the best paths of bringing bright people in. We need to bring people in. Madelyn and I, we've done our bit. It's time for younger folks to get into the program, but you can't get them into the program if the government won't hire them, and train them. That's nuts.
So NNSA has a really good fellowship program, and it is a path to work at NNSA. It's a really good fellowship program, and the labs are always on the hunt. But right now, if there is a hiring freeze in place, and it does extend to the national security, the NNSA fellows, most of whom are routinely hired either by NNSA or sometimes by the labs, they're going to go through this year-long program, and then they're going to learn and be turned loose, which is just a huge waste of resource and talent. So we really have to focus on, at least in this arena, newer people.
Well, I hope that answers Russ's question, and he can follow it up there. I'm going to turn it back over to Kimberly, who's going to close us out. And on behalf of the NIDS, my friends, thank you very much for an extraordinary, as usual, informative and thought-provoking set of comments. We'll be back asking you for your wisdom again. But again, thank you on behalf of NIDS. Over to you, Kimberly.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Frank and Madelyn for all your insights, and we really appreciate your time and efforts. We will see everybody next week for our next HUSI event. Look for an invitation in your email, and if you want to reach out and share your experiences today, feel free to email us at nids@thinkdeterrence.com. Thank you, and we want to respect your time. So have a great day.